Okay, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about designing for the full spectrum of minds. I'm Dana Randall. I am Senior Creative Director at Level Access. When we're talking about creativity, creativity is diverse because the human mind is diverse. Yet, we often design branding, campaigns, and digital experiences as if there's only one correct way to think, to feel, or to process. But today is about what happens when we stop designing for the average user and start really designing for real users and real brains. So now you know what that little cat I had on the opening slide was about, because today we're going to use Alice in Wonderland as a metaphor. Because designing for the full spectrum of minds can sometimes feel like tumbling down the rabbit hole. On the screen is a quote from Lewis Carroll that says, "Sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." I don't know. I was out late last night, so I think this morning was more like 3 impossible things for me. But, this story really resonates with me, but not as a fantasy. It's because it feels familiar. In the world of Alice in Wonderland, it's a world where nothing is explained, where the rules change constantly, and you're expected to make sense of it all. You see, creativity, it's not neutral, and design is not experienced the same way by everyone. We really often fall into the trap of designing like there's a right way and a wrong way. And today we're really going to go beyond that and understand that there are a lot of ways to approach things, and there are a lot of different ways that people receive and process information. So let's talk about what this talk is not about. I hate to disappoint you, but we're not going to talk about color contrast ratio. We're not talking about focus indicators, button states, WCAG checklists, just follow the guidelines. I want to be clear, those things, they do matter, but that's not the full story. You see, accessibility tells us when something works. Neuro Inclusive Creative asks whether it feels safe, welcoming, and understandable. So come with me on a trip through Wonderland. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I invite you into my brain. On the screen, I'm sharing a photo of a young girl. This is actually my niece, Allie, and she's dressed as Alice. And her scale to the little house in the background, it's off. Either the house is small or she's big, but either way, she doesn't fit. The house was not designed for her. So what is this talk about? It's about sensory impact, emotional load, predictability, trust, and designing beyond the average user. So this is our through the looking glass moment, where we step beyond how design simply looks and we start thinking about how it feels. Because creative work isn't just visual, it's sensory. And those sensory choices can either invite people in or it can push them out. You see, the brain, it's not a screen reader, it's a sensory system. It's a sensory interpreter, and it's not passive. So when you offend the brain, especially the neurodivergent brain, it's usually all systems stop. And the neurodivergent brain also often processes more sensory input, not less. Design choices can either regulate or they can overwhelm. And when we're talking about sensory inputs, we're talking about texture, motion, spatial awareness, smells, tastes, sounds, and colors and images. So for some people, color isn't just seen, it's heard, it has a taste, and it has weight. For some people, saturated colors can be physically painful. High contrast can feel sharp, aggressive, loud. Color is a sensory experience. Examples of that is bright yellow can feel joyful or physically painful. Deep blue can feel calming or isolating, and high contrast can feel sharp or aggressive. So let's get a little interactive here. And if you're feeling brave, who wants to share what they think yellow tastes like? Anyone? You want to raise your hand? Okay, in the back corner. Lemons. Lemons, that's a good one. Anyone else? What does yellow taste like? In the back over there. Tart, that's a good one.
Bitter.
Bitter, sour, mustard, right? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here, but it's to start to understand that the neurodivergent brain tends to cross over a lot of sensory inputs. So, let's keep going. Deep purple. What does deep purple feel like? What's its texture? Fuzzy? What was that? Velvet? Yeah. So you start to kind of understand that this is not unique to people with neurodiversity, but when we start to think about the choices that we make in design, we have to understand that we're implying things and that experience can be very different for different people. Let's keep going. Blue. What does blue smell like? Ice? That's a good one. I didn't even think of that one. Laundry. Ooh, I love that clean laundry smell. And there's differences between what a bright saturated blue might smell like and what like a light pastel blue, right? So when someone says laundry, I think of a light blue. I'm here in front of you wearing head to toe pastel pink, my personal brand color, my favorite color. So for me, what is pink, light pink? There's a big difference between what bright pink kind of tastes like or smells like, and to me, what light pink tastes and smells like. For me, light pink, it's sweet. It's maybe cotton candy. I have a sweet tooth, so this all really, really adds up. So now we're in a room today, and we've got, I'm backlit by a sign that says level access, and we've got a couple up lights in the room and a couple orbs around the room that are glowing different colors. And generally speaking, most of the lights in this room are of a blue and purple tone with a couple accents of pink. Now, which I'm not going to do, but if I change all the lights in this room to red and orange, it would change the way you feel. And it's a little chilly in here this morning. And I'm willing to bet that if you perceive color, if I changed all the lights in this room to red, you may think this room is warmer than it actually is. And again, these are all familiar experiences. You experience this all the time. You understand that the neurodivergent brain experiences this tenfold. You start to understand what it means to design with neuro inclusion in mind, the things that you need to think about and the things that you need to consider. So let's go beyond color. Let's be a little bit more inclusive. Let's talk about the texture, right? Because we talked about colors that have textures. But let's talk about something like a Sherpa fabric, like a fuzzy Sherpa fabric. Is it warm or is it cold? It's warm, right? And how about something that has a glossy or slick finish? Cool, right? Like this is starting to connect. These choices matter. They impact how our brains perceive things. Now, it gets interesting when we talk about creative because sometimes a mismatch can be fantastic. That's where things are unexpected, innovative, or even a very pleasing sensory experience. I think of an example. I don't know I think it's called like a water cake or something. It's like a jelly cake and it's transparent and it's soft and it's squishy. And when you see something that's clear and almost glass-like, that squishy kind of texture is unexpected. So those are some things that also bring a lot of delight. For some people, also sounds have color. Imagine living in a world, the sounds that you hear create a cascade of colors around you. For some people with neurodiversity, sounds are also a visual experience. Now, I don't live with that, but there are people that do. So again, it's about really understanding that the color choices we make, the sounds we use can impact people on a sensory level in ways beyond what we're just thinking about by default. Is it bright? Is it dark? There's more to it than that. Design has emotional volume. Wonderland, it's not chaotic. It's just really intense. Neuro-inclusive design asks us to turn the volume down, but without losing meaning. I want to be clear that neuro-inclusive design can be rich, it can be layered, it can be engaging, but this needs to be done with intention. We turn the volume up when we are intending to grab your attention, but we must give you a break. So what's a break? We understand, sure, you need a break, but what does a break actually mean? A break can be defined as fewer words, more white space, fewer decisions, a clear path, or next step. For me, the best designs really balance those details. This is something that not everyone will notice, but those who do, do. And that is how we get really customer loyalty and brand loyalty, because it's those little decisions that it might not impact everyone. And this is true for accessibility as a whole, but we should include this as true for neuro-inclusive design. I think about design volume not only when I'm fully charged and I have all my spoons, but I have to think about it when my battery is low. I am out of spoons for the day. So that would be another kind of thing, is like, see, neurodiversity, it's always changing. The way my day starts is very different from the way my day ends. So it's important when I'm making decisions to be neuro-inclusive, I'm not thinking about the optimal scenario. I'm really having to think about more worst case when I'm super drained, out of spoons. I mean, I talk a lot, but when my spoons are out, I am nonverbal. So then we think about ways of how someone might communicate differently when they're out of those spoons. These are all ultimately their user experience decisions and their design decisions. The goal here is regulation, not stimulation. Design is fundamentally textured. It's a multisensory experience. Good design is when these experiences complement each other. For example, clean, minimal colors, rich in texture. A tactile experience. This can apply both to the physical world and digital world. But let's talk about it from physical manifestation for a minute. I think about things like minimal, clean packaging. For me, it's pastel pink, but maybe with like a suede or matte finish. And maybe there are tactile elements to the packaging. We think about designing with tactile in mind, often for someone who's blind or low vision. But this is also a sensory inclusive choice. It means something to someone who's neurodivergent. Everyone benefits. You might not even think about it, but sometimes you might enjoy the experience of a packaged good because of a slight bumpy texture or the type of, as I said, like a matte or suede finish on the outside. We think about, like, I'm not blind or low vision. I don't read Braille, but I know that there's a lot of packaging designs that are out there where they use certain tactile elements to help someone differentiate maybe a shampoo from a conditioner. But, that's another example. It's a sensory sort of experience that is really something that everyone can benefit from. So flat doesn't always mean calm. Motion, to be clear, does not always mean engaging. It says on the screen, surprise is a luxury not everyone can afford. I intentionally did not put much motion in these slides today because it's important to practice what I teach. Jump scaring you all with motion on a slide would be exactly what not to do. Now, to be clear, not all surprise is bad, but it needs to be treated with care and with consideration. So let's dig into motion for a minute, because motion can be a pretty polarizing topic. I also live with a vestibular disability, so motion for me is a very polarizing topic. That's why this chair's here, just in case the room starts to tilt to the left. But, motion is not off limits. Motion should guide, not surprise. Unexpected motion can hijack your attention, spike anxiety, or even just shut down cognition altogether. So is motion off limits? No, it's definitely not, right? We live in a world in motion. I don't live in a static environment. So what I generally guide people with when it comes to doing things like motion is design with realism in mind. Design motion that mimics the real world, not Wonderland. That means don't do things like warp speed or things that one wouldn't experience in the natural world. This is not just for someone with a vestibular issue, but it's also, as I mentioned, the neurodivergent experience is you are more sensitive to these sensory inputs. So what will happen is, even if I'm having a good vestibular day, if someone blasts me with a bunch of motion, I can be thrown completely off kilter, right? It takes over my brain. So ultimately what it means is, don't design motion that makes me feel like I ate some magic mushrooms. Order. Order builds trust. It provides clear organization and expectations and outcomes. Predictability creates safety. Organized versus chaotic layouts. See, this is huge for neurodivergent users. We need to prioritize things like consistency, clear beginnings, middles, and ends, expected outcomes, or narrative structure. You know, when I know what will happen next, my brain can rest. That is why repetition, predictability, and consistency is so important for neuro-inclusive design. So now I'm going to shift a bit. Let's talk about what designing for me, Dana, looks like. I mean, I think it was already obvious by my talk track so far, but just to make it super clear, I'm autistic. I have ADHD. If anyone in the room is AuDHD, it is like you're two cats fighting in a small cage together, right? I'm highly verbal, capable. I'm also highly masked. In fact, most people would never know about my disability unless I stood on stage and told everyone about it. You know, I also have relatively low support needs. This is who I am. So what does it mean when you're designing for a persona like me? You see, on the screen, I've got a picture of the Mad Hatter. He is looking a bit aggravated or unsettled. And this is a reflection of how I can often feel inside. Sometimes accessible experiences physically hurt me. Well, that feels a little confusing, right? Because we're here at this conference and everyone's like, accessibility, you got to do this, you got to do that. So what do we do when we run into experiences where something that's super high contrast, right? Because we are all told color contrast. Well, let me give you a practical example. I mean, black and white. Okay. So white page, black text, high contrast, pass, fantastic. For me, terrible. Okay. Black background, white text, maybe a little better, a little less harsh on the eyes. In fact, at Level Access, when we have PowerPoint templates for these presentations, and I have a rule that any presentation that is given in real life on a screen must use what we call our dark mode, our dark backgrounds. No white backgrounds because it's literally physically painful. You know, but this is not just about someone gets sensory overload. The great news is often dark backgrounds and light text improve perceivability for people that are low vision. So, right, it's a win-win. So I can often find experiences to be overwhelming, too many choices, loud branding, constant novelty, or unclear hierarchy. Being able to use something and being okay while using it are not the same. This is where good design and neuro-inclusive creative just naturally intersect. Honestly, it's probably why I didn't learn I was on the spectrum until I was over 40. I didn't understand that what I favored in design wasn't just preference or taste, it was need. But the good news is, in most cases, good design is neuro-inclusive design. These things don't combat with each other. So what do we do in a situation where I said black and white too harsh? What's the solution? The solution is instead of black, maybe it's a dark gray, right? Instead of white, maybe it's not like a pure stark white, but there's a little bit of a tint to it. It's just a little bit softer, right? So it's just sometimes these little tweaks or these little adjustments. It's not like you can no longer use black and white. Well, that's not practical. That's not going to happen. But we can make small adjustments that still include what we need to do for accessibility, but refine it for what we need to do to be neuro-inclusive. When design is chaotic, I compensate. But design can support me or demand more and just make it difficult for me to exist. See, masking has a cost: cognitive labor, emotional exhaustion, invisible effort. I have on the screen an image of the Queen of Hearts. She was a bit of a demanding pain, wasn't she? And there's text over the image and it says, sometimes you just have to say, off with their heads. But the reality is most of the time you can't. You just got to deal with it and pay the price. You see, I don't need simpler ideas. I just need quieter and more intentional delivery. This means intentional color, clear hierarchy, predictable patterns, purposeful motion, and multisensory inputs. Okay, let's talk about that one for a minute. What does multisensory inputs mean? Well, to me, you see the way that I process information, I need to feed my brain with at least two inputs. So what does that mean? I watch podcasts. I don't listen to them. Well, to be clear, I listen to them, but I cannot listen to a podcast that's just audio. If there's a podcast that I'm interested in, I'm going to go to YouTube and I need to watch that podcast. Now, I'm I'm not really watching anything. It's two people sitting having a discussion. Right? There's not like action happening. But the video aspect gives my brain that secondary input that I need to keep me focused. I might even add a third input, which I honestly do a lot, which is turning on captions, right? Because this gives my brain multiple ways to capture the information. There's another one. Captions are not they're great for neuro-inclusive design because many people with neurodiversity do need these multiple inputs. I would say that one probably leans more on the ADHD side, right, than the autism side. I also don't read books. Don't judge me. I listen to books. Am I technically capable of reading? I am. But the thing is that the moment that the wind blows, like my hair touches my face, I might smell something, I'm gone. In order for me to process the information in a book, I will follow the words on a digital device like an iPad or Kindle, and I'll turn on the screen reader. And I need the book to be read to me. So I will follow along and I will listen to it. And that's a great example of an assistive technology that wasn't designed for me, but it's a huge part of my brain's optimal tech stack, right? So another thing to keep in mind with neuro-inclusive design is the importance of multisensory. Again, great news. We do this already with accessibility. When we're putting out video, we're like, hey, let's make sure we've got captions. So again, you'll see a common thread here, but I think the key point is a lot of the things that you're already doing with accessibility are supporting neuro-inclusive design. But, maybe you're sitting in a room and someone goes, oh, we really need to do the captions. It takes so long or it's really annoying. So I like to say it adds to your argument that you're broadening the spectrum of the people that are benefiting from those types of accessibility needs. I like to say it strengthens your argument, right? Okay, now I'm done talking about my favorite topic myself. Just kidding. No, anyway, let's talk about Gabe. Gabe experiences the world in a way that most designers would never consider. In fact, my personal journey of designing with autism in mind was heavily impacted by Gabe and pictured in this, his mom, Nikki. So who's Gabe? Who's Nikki? Nikki's a childhood friend of mine. We grew up together. We were on the cheerleading squad together. And this is her teenage son, Gabe. Gabe is non-speaking. He is an avid speller. He is an AAC device user. And he has high support needs. The thing is that I'll share the info after, but Gabe, Nikki and Gabe share their journey with autism online. They've got millions of followers, like billions of views. And so Gabe and Nikki are really core, not just because I know them personally, but they're core to my continuing education about what it means to design for Gabe. I'm constantly paying attention to the types of things that Nikki, his mom, is doing to support and encourage him. You see, for Gabe, the environment is the interface and design is communication. Gabe communicates a bit differently. He doesn't use the spoken word, but he has a lot to say. And he's a teenager, so trust me, he has a lot to say. He communicates through expression with his eyes. He uses an AAC device, but that's mostly to communicate things like recurring tasks. But on the screen, I have an example of a spelling board. And this is something that Gabe uses. And it's actually a newer device for him, but he uses the spelling board to communicate his emotions, his poetry, and his passions. The AAC device doesn't provide him everything that he needs for communication. It's designed for functional tasks. It's not designed for feeling. So his mom's added a spelling board to his tech stack to allow him the ability to communicate in a different way for things outside what were those fixed options on his AAC device. But then we've got to think about, what if Gabe doesn't have access to one of those several communication devices? It's important to remember that his communication method's going to shift, and we have to design with that in mind. Have we provided multiple ways for Gabe to give feedback, right? So that's what designing for Gabe means. For Gabe, design is not about preference. To be honest, for me, things can work out for me if it's not ideal. For Gabe, it's full stop. I have to understand that when I design for Gabe, failure to meet his needs can mean complete failure, not annoyance. It's about safety and nervous system regulation. It's also worth noting that Gabe thrives in a highly vivid sensory environment. This is where he and I differ. I can find these environments completely overwhelming, but Gabe is a sensory seeker. So on the screen, I have an image of a space that's like a very vibrant, almost like a galaxy of colors. This is an actual immersive experience. So what's going on here is I'm sharing a video of Gabe at this immersive experience. It's a space surrounded by projection mapping and motion and music. Gabe loves this experience. He is twirling and dancing, and he's holding his trusty fidgets with his blue and purple belts. This immersive environment wouldn't be a non-starter for me, but I definitely do not thrive in this wonderland, right? But Gabe does. So it's important to understand that, let's share this quote. Maybe you've heard it before. This quote on the screen from Dr. Stephen Shore. Remember that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? Okay, that's why it's important for me to highlight Gabe today, to reinforce how different we are and how diverse the spectrum is. So let's talk about the spectrum. On the screen, I have a bar. On the left side is green, and on the right side it is red. And it says less autistic on the left and more autistic on the right. This is not the spectrum, okay? To be very clear. When we design for neuro-inclusion, we want to consider the edges and the edge cases because designing for the edges benefit the middle, and clarity helps everyone. On the screen now, I have a radar graph. This is the spectrum, right? Different areas for language, motor skills, sensory perception, executive function. Some points can be high in areas and low in others. Right now I'm showing the areas for the autism spectrum, but this concept applies to most of neurodiversity. Now I'm sharing the ADHD spectrum, similar radar chart, different criteria for measurement, but still a spectrum in a similar way. And I mentioned I'm AuDHD, so I have these two that overlap each other, and it's a hot mess. This is the heart of neuro-inclusive creative. The spectrum, it's not binary. Designing for Gabe does not exclude Dana. It includes her, or in this case, me, right? Maybe some of these choices are more meaningful than others, but that's okay. I think what is interesting is you'll often hear in things like product design, that's an edge case, right? Don't worry about it, it's an edge case, right? In neuro-inclusive design, we want to think about those edge cases. That's where we have a perspective shift. Because if you think about those edge cases, again, it might not matter to everyone, but in most cases, it's not going to do any harm and other people are going to benefit from it. So that's a little bit of when you go back to work next week and someone says, oh, that's an edge case, remember that in the case of neuro-inclusive design, edge cases are helpful. Wonderland is not strange because it's different. It's strange because no one explained the rules. So when we think about if we were to redesign Wonderland, it's about making sure the rules are explained. Again, you're going to hear some patterns: predictability, consistency, no jump scares. So here's a quote. If I had a world of my own, everything would be nonsense. Nothing would be what it is because everything would be what it isn't. It's a quote from Alice in Wonderland. That, to me, summarizes the neurodivergent experience. So let's simplify this into 3 core areas. Neuro-inclusive creative is empathy, intention, and expansion. It's not about lowering the bar. It's about widening the lens. It's not about doing less. It's about doing things with more intention. Neuro-inclusive design is not abstract or aspirational either. These are mindset shifts designers can apply immediately. Here are a few things that you can start doing or thinking about tomorrow. Design for emotional safety, not just usability. Turn down the volume before adding more. This also includes words and content. Remove surprise unless it serves understanding, and design with the nervous system in mind. Emotional safety and sensory regulation are core design responsibilities. So what does this mean in practice? Ask yourself things like, what might feel overwhelming here? Offer clarity, order, predictable outcomes. Be intentional with color, motion, texture, sound. Design with the edges of the spectrum in mind. Are there any designers in the room? Yes. I ask you to pause and reflect before adding stimulation, a little bit of restraint. You know that saying when people say, like, when you're leaving the house, take off one accessory? Not me, I've been on a lot of rings. It's kind of like that in design. Look at the designs that you're producing critically and say, is there anything that is just added fluff here that we could remove? That's a good practice for neuro-inclusive design. This is not about perfection. It's about intention, and we're not always going to get it right. That's okay. Don't let that fear stand in your way. That fear of failure should not stop you from trying. When we design for the full spectrum of minds, we don't make creativity smaller. We make it kinder. So thank you for being willing and open to going down the rabbit hole with me. I'd like to open up for any sort of Q&A or discussion. I invite you to share some things that you might have done or considered to be more neuro-inclusive in your design, or share examples of what something someone could do that to be more neuro-inclusive for you. Does anyone want to share? Right there in the back. Oh, absolutely. And that's a great example. When I go into meetings, it's really helpful to get the content in advance, because sometimes I have some delayed processing. So I like to get the information. I like to come in feeling prepared, not because I'm speaking, just because I'm listening. And then to your point, sharing something afterwards, because you may remember one or two things, right? So that's a great example. Anything? Yes, over there. Yeah. Yeah, I can tell you when I'm traveling anywhere, I look at the floor plan of the hotel. I need to know where my room is. It's about no surprises. And I love that example. It's really important to understand that to be neuro-inclusive, what happens is not only do I feel like I need to prepare mentally and emotionally, but let me tell you what happens when someone changes the plans on me. That's when the meltdowns and outbursts happen. So because I think we're up on time, if you'd like to connect with me, I've got a QR code on the screen that will bring you to my LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out, say hello. And then also, just give that a minute for anyone who wants to capture it. Thank you, everyone.